have not done a video working on the Corvette in a while. And I guess that's a good thing for me because that means it's been working. But it recently stopped working, which is to say it developed a problem. And I first noticed it at a car wash when I was cleaning it up. And I tried to restart the car and it would not start, or at least it hesitated quite a bit from starting. It acted like it didn't want to start. But then, after I got home and I came out the next day and tried to start the car, it started, but the idle was so low that the car was just about to cut itself off. So those two things together suggested to me that perhaps the idle air control valve could be at fault. And this is that valve after I pulled it out and put a new one in. And I'll show you in this video how I was able to do that without pulling the throttle body off the engine. So I saved a lot of time and agony. And once again, this is a 1992 Corvette. The procedure, the space under the hood and where you put your wrenches may differ, so you'll want to check out your own very carefully before you assume that what I'm going to show you here is going to work on yours. And this is my arsenal of tools that I used to do that with. These are hose clamp pliers because I had to move a hose clamp out of the way, as you'll see. And this is a 32 millimeter socket. Now it's not terribly deep, but it turns out it is deep enough. I also bought a deep socket, what I don't think it would work because the sidewall was too thick and it just doesn't fit when I'm trying to do things in there. And this is a C-clamp plier that I got just because I wanted some. Didn't have any. I didn't really need it for this job per se, but I used it to help move the hose clamp when I had it clamped down with this nice guy here. So, and of course a torque wrench to get it out. It wasn't that tight. To be clear, these things go into an aluminum throttle body housing, and you do not want to over tighten it, and it was not over tight when I took it out. I guesstimate maybe it was in there about 5 foot-pounds or something. And of course when I put it back in, I did not tighten it down any more than that. Just snug. It comes with some sealant on it and it was not going to move, so just tightened it up. So let's take a look under the hood at where this is in the car. So I'm going to walk around to the other side because that's where it is, over here. And I've got my Ryobi lithium battery powered light here, which I love. Use working on that thing under cars as well as here, but this is going to allow you to look and see where this is mounted. So I do have the factory service manual, and that's the first thing I looked at to make sure I knew what was what here, and it labels things, and we'll zoom in on that in a second. But here is the actual intake air control valve, IAC. This big guy right here. So here are a few of the other pages I printed out from the factory service manual. It shows the pintle coming in and out here. If it moves left, then it closes off this passage and air cannot do a bypass around the throttle plates themselves. And that's done through command from the computer, the ECM, that moves this thing in and out in, I don't know, I think there's like 50 total steps. So it has 5 or 6 bits of resolution in setting the pintle position. And you can probably see some of the problems of getting to it. I've got to get the socket on that, have enough room for the socket wrench to fit in and not be tilted too much. Throttle position sensor, idle air controller, and inlet air temperature sensor. And I had to pull all of these connectors off. This one, that one, that one. And then I had to move these hoses out of the way so that I could get the socket wrench and the hose clamp down into here, as I'll show you in some static pictures in a minute. And this is the hose clamp that was interfering because I could not get the socket in here. It would hit this and or that, and I could not get it in. So I had to take this hose clamp, move it aft and rotate it up, and then I had a clear shot in with the socket wrench. So circled in red here is the throttle body in which the idle air control valve is mounted. It's down at the bottom here. And I'm really lazy. I did not want to take this whole throttle body off, partly because it's a lot of work, partly because I did not have a gasket for it and I'd have to order more stuff, and partly because there is a coolant line running through it here. And I don't want coolant to leak out or to have to refill or wait. There's an OptiSpark below this, and we know they're subject to moisture and problems, so I just did not want to go into that. So instead I opted to see if I could get a socket onto this thing. Here is the IAC, the Idle Air Control valve. And here's the interfering hose clamp. And I tried to put a socket in here and it wouldn't go on straight enough. And so I had to move this. Fortunately, I figured it would be tight enough that I would not get leaks if I simply pulled it back this way and then rotated it up. It would still be stuck on here. That's been my experience. So with the nifty new hose clamp pliers, I was able to grab it and pull it back. However, there was a lot of struggle to get this thing in position. Notice that they have the bottom part of the handle underneath a cross piece, which is part of the power steering mount here. I had to wedge that in. I also had to take this hose, it was in a little tray here, and kind of move it up and over, but I didn't have to disconnect it, so that was good. This is the particular hose clamp pliers that I bought. I bought another one, but it didn't work. It wouldn't go in straight, and I couldn't grab the thing well enough. This one I could grab it because the little cup here is a very small depth, and that was important because I had to get that cup into this space right here, and this connector is very close to it, at least the way this was assembled on my car. But because of that particular tool, I was able to sort of tilt it and get it in here and get the other one on good enough that I could squeeze it and then pull this back as shown here. So now it's back some. And then I took it out and reoriented it so that I could rotate the hose clamp up. I never had hose clamp pliers before, but these are great. Having the right tool is always great. You can see you can't see the tab because it's underneath this cup, but the top tab is in the cup, and the bottom tab fits into this little slot here, if you can get it in right. And then you just squeeze them together, and there's a ratchet, and it'll stay together, and then you can just move. This is the socket that I used. It seemed to work good. It's a Craftsman, and I had another Craftsman and measured the distance, and I thought it was going to be deep enough, and it was, so that was good. And also I noted the sidewall here looks fairly thin at the corners, and that was very important. As you can see here, when this goes on, there's a piece of the throttle body housing which is very close to the outer portion of the socket as you try to stick the thing on there. In fact, I cannot get it on perfectly straight, but it's got enough play, and I wasn't worried about the forces. Again, there was about 5 foot-pounds as all this thing was in here, so that was good. So I was able to get it in deep enough that it grabbed it well, and then just gently lifted on this, and fortunately I didn't have to put a lot of force on it. So after turning it several partial turns with the torque wrench, I unscrewed it by hand, and here it is removed. And here is the new idle air control valve that I bought. Apparently currently unavailable, but I guess there's probably other ones you can buy many other places, Corvette outlets. Amazon claimed this would fit my 92 Corvette. It also says it in the description here, 89 through 93 Chevrolet Camaro and Corvette. What's important about this slide is the length here. I was checking the length and the other dimensions to make sure they were the same as the old one. So the length from the mounting surface to the tip of the pintle has a specified maximum in the factory service manual. I think it's 28 millimeters, but I didn't measure it. Instead, I just put this aside the old one and noted that, see the red line, it's a little bit shorter, so it wasn't going to bottom out as I screwed it into the hole. I also looked at it and noted that the old one seems to have a larger diameter pintle at the base than this one. However, if you look into this hole, there's some black here, and I think that's where the pintle of the old one was contacting it. And so that's kind of right here, and this one is wide enough that it wasn't too narrow for that. So I knew there was a surface here. Anyway, it said it was going to work, and the measurements suggest that that's the case. And so I proceeded after removing some old thread sealer here. Now it is interesting to note this black stuff on the old one. For the life of me, I'm not sure where that came from. It looks like carbon, but I can't understand where that would be in an intake manifold. However, when I bought this car about 5 years ago, it had an air filter that had some oil in it. So apparently that was a fancy thing. And my guess is that some of that oil made its way into the airflow and ultimately clogged this thing up. Now, I don't know if that was the point of failure or the reason for failure of this. The coils inside could be bad. The car's 30 years old at this point, and so this thing is too, I think. But that might be the reason that it failed. Here's another look into that hole. And I took the new one and carefully threaded it by hand into here and made sure that I wasn't cross-threading anything, went several partial turns by hand or more, and then used the torque wrench to finish it off. I did not torque it down to 13 foot-pounds, probably maybe 5 at the most, because that's kind of what it was in. And also the compound sealant that was used on the threads, it wasn't going to back out, so not worried about that. And here it is with all the connectors back in place and the hose clamp placed back where it was. Now on this car, which is a 1992, the alignment after you're done is very easy, as written up here. Basically you get in, you press the pedal down a little bit, you start the car, then you release the pedal, you sit there for 5 seconds or so, and then you shut the thing off for 10 seconds and restart it. I didn't actually do that right the first time, but I did it a second time and it all worked fine. So I'm in the car after the job and I'm just going to start it up so you can watch it idle. And it seems to be a little smoother now, I think. Anyway, I'll start it up. Okay, so it started up, went a little above 1,000 RPM. It's going to settle back to about 1,000, and then after it warms up, it settles out at about 800, I think, or something like that. Let's see, some manual transmission. So I'm in neutral, so I take my foot off the clutch there and turn the AC on, see what happens. AC came on, so it handled that without any trouble. It's part of what the IAC is for, but it's also for, as the engine warms up, the air-fuel mixture needs to change, and so it adjusts to that. And there's some learning that takes place. Alright, definitely fully warmed up now. 189 degrees. Something similar on the analog dial over here. And you can see how nice and steady it is at, I'm going to call that 800 RPM.